The morning sun filtered through the maple trees lining Pinecrest Estates as I helped my son, Alex, navigate the temporary metal ramp leading from our new front porch. The portable aluminum contraption rattled underneath his wheelchair, making him wince with each bump. His determined face showed no complaint, but as his father, I knew better. The ramp was inadequate, just like every other temporary solution we had used since the accident 3 years ago. "Just a few more weeks with this thing, buddy," I said, steadying the ramp with my foot. "Once we get the permanent one built, no more wobbles." Alex grinned up at me, his 13-year-old optimism somehow intact despite everything he had been through. "This house is already way better than the apartment, Dad. I can actually turn around in the bathroom without hitting the walls." The house represented everything we had worked for. After years of saving every penny from my salary as the county fire marshal, we had finally purchased this perfect single-story home in this pristine suburban neighborhood. The wide hallways, open floor plan, and potential for proper accessibility modifications made it ideal for Alex. The moving trucks had departed just last month, leaving us to settle into our new beginning. Neighbors had welcomed us warmly in those first days. Mrs. Harper from next door brought over a casserole still hot from the oven. The Rodriguez family across the cul-de-sac invited us to their weekend barbecue. Even the retired colonel who lived on the corner stopped by with a basket of fruit and neighborhood information. Pinecrest Estates seemed like the fresh start we desperately needed. Our kitchen table was covered with blueprints and permits for the wheelchair ramp we planned to build. The designs showed a gently sloping concrete path with wooden railings that would curve elegantly from our front door to the driveway. The city building department had already approved the plans. I kept my position as fire marshal quiet in the neighborhood, preferring to be known simply as Alex's dad rather than by my professional authority. "When do the builders start, Dad?" Alex asked one evening, carefully examining the blueprints, tracing the path with his finger as if already imagining his freedom. "Tomorrow morning first thing," I replied, watching his eyes light up. "In about 3 weeks, you will be zooming in and out of this house like it is nothing." Only one neighbor seemed troubled by our arrival. Mrs. Patricia Winters lived in the large colonial directly across from us. I often caught her staring from behind her curtains, eyes narrowing when construction materials were delivered to our driveway. She was always impeccably dressed, even to collect her morning newspaper. When we waved, she would respond with the briefest of nods before retreating inside. "Good morning," I called out to her one day, determined to break the ice. "Beautiful neighborhood you have here." "Yes, we work very hard to keep it that way," she responded, her gaze drifting pointedly to the pile of lumber in our driveway. "The Homeowners Association has very specific guidelines about external modifications. I trust you have reviewed the covenant documents thoroughly." Before I could respond, she had already turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the sidewalk. Later that afternoon, the final approval for the ramp installation arrived from the City Permits Department. The official envelope contained all the necessary documents, including the Americans with Disabilities Act compliance certification. Everything was in order. Tomorrow, the construction would begin, and our new life would truly start. I never imagined that a simple wheelchair ramp would become the battle line in a neighborhood war. The concrete foundation for the ramp began taking shape on a clear Tuesday morning. The construction crew worked efficiently, outlining the gentle curve that would eventually connect our front door to the driveway. Alex positioned himself by the window, watching with undisguised excitement as the workers mixed cement and began pouring the base. "It is happening, Dad," he said, his voice filled with quiet joy. "No more bumpy metal ramp." I was reviewing some work documents at the kitchen table when I noticed a shadow fall across the papers. Looking up, I saw Patricia Winters marching purposefully across the street toward our house. Her crimson blazer stood out sharply against the green lawns, a clipboard clutched in one hand and a thick binder, clearly labeled HOA regulations, tucked under her arm. "Good morning," I said, stepping outside to greet her. "Can I help you with something?" Her smile never reached her eyes as she surveyed the construction site. "Mr. Reynolds, I am Patricia Winters, president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association." She extended a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "I need to discuss this construction project with you." The C. Construction foreman paused his work, sensing tension. Patricia walked around the foundation outline, making notes on her clipboard. "Did you submit this design to the Architectural Review Committee before beginning construction?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I have all the necessary permits from the city," I explained, retrieving the folder of documentation from inside, including ADA accommodation paperwork that supersedes HOA restrictions on accessibility modifications. Patricia flipped through the papers with obvious disapproval, her lips pursing tighter with each page turn. "These city permits are irrelevant to our covenant requirements, Mr. Reynolds. All external modifications must receive written approval from our committee before construction begins." She closed the folder with a snap. "This work needs to stop immediately until proper authorization is granted." The Americans with Disabilities Act provides clear protections for necessary accessibility modifications, I explained calmly. "My son needs this ramp to safely enter and exit our home." "Rules are rules, Mr. Reynolds," she replied coldly. "The aesthetic standards of Pinecrest Estates protect all our property values. The committee meets monthly to review proposals. You can present your case then, though I must warn you that front-facing modifications of this nature are rarely approved." 3 days later, a bright orange violation notice appeared on our front door, officiously citing unapproved aesthetic modifications detrimental to neighborhood property values, and threatening daily fines of $100 until the violation was remedied. The construction crew had continued working, but their pace had noticeably slowed as they cast nervous glances across the street where Patricia occasionally stood watching, taking photographs. At the community mailbox, I noticed how neighbors who had been friendly now averted their eyes when I approached. Conversation stopped abruptly when I rounded corners. The clear message: no one wanted to be caught in the crossfire between the new family and the HOA president. I called Patricia that evening, hoping reasonable conversation might resolve the situation. "Mrs. Winters, I understand your concerns about neighborhood aesthetics," I began. "But surely you can appreciate the necessity of this modification for my son." "Mr. Reynolds," she responded, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy, "I understand your situation is difficult. However, exceptions simply cannot be made, even in cases like yours. Rules maintain our community standards." "But the ADA specifically protects." "The HOA predates your purchase of the property," she interrupted, her tone hardening. "You agreed to our covenants when you signed your closing documents. The fines will continue to accrue until construction ceases." The next morning, a certified letter arrived announcing an emergency HOA meeting regarding our continuing violations. The construction foreman approached me with concern in his eyes. "Sir, we have been getting calls from someone on the HOA board," he said hesitantly. "They are questioning our permits and threatening to report us for code violations. Should we continue?" Something cold settled in my stomach as I stared across at Patricia's house. Through her front window, I could see her on the phone, watching our property as she spoke. This fight was just beginning, and for Alex's sake, I could not afford to lose it. The Pinecrest Estates Community Center hummed with tension as I took my seat for the emergency HOA meeting. Familiar faces filled the rows of chairs. Neighbors who had welcomed us weeks before now sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. At the front table, Patricia Winters presided over the board members with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Her gray suit and pearl necklace projected authority as she called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m. Our first agenda item concerns a serious violation at 447 Magnolia Drive, Patricia announced, her voice carrying through the room. A projector whirred to life, casting images of my half-constructed wheelchair ramp onto the wall. This unauthorized structure violates 6 separate covenants regarding exterior modifications. She used a laser pointer to indicate specific features of the ramp. Note the concrete foundation extending beyond the permitted walkway width. The planned wooden railings do not match approved decorative standards. The overall structure creates an institutional appearance inconsistent with our community aesthetic guidelines. I raised my hand to speak, but Patricia continued without acknowledgement. The homeowner was properly notified of violations, but has refused to cease construction. Point of order, I called out, standing from my chair. I would like to address these claims. Patricia rapped her gavel sharply. You are out of order, Mr. Reynolds. Homeowners may speak during the designated comment period. For 40 minutes, the board methodically discussed my violation as if I were not sitting 10 feet away. When finally permitted to speak, I was allowed exactly 3 minutes. I quickly explained the ADA requirements, my son's needs, and the legal protections for accessibility modifications. The Americans with Disabilities Act specifically states that HOAs cannot prohibit reasonable modifications needed for a disabled resident. I explained, passing copies of the relevant legal statutes to the board members. An elderly gentleman on the board, Mr. Grayson, began to speak. Perhaps we should consider the legal ramifications before. That will be enough, Howard, Patricia interrupted, fixing him with a stern glare that silenced him immediately. The board is aware of various legal interpretations, but our covenants are clear. The vote was unanimous against us. Construction must cease immediately. All existing structures must be removed within 7 days. Daily fines would increase to $250 until compliance was achieved. When I returned home, Alex was waiting anxiously by the window. His face fell as he read my expression. They said no, did not they? He asked quietly. Just a temporary setback, buddy, I assured him, though doubt gnawed at my confidence. We will find a way. Later that evening, Alex wheeled into the kitchen where I was reviewing our options. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice small. Dad, is it because of my wheelchair? We can move again if we need to. His question tore at my heart. No, Alex, this is our home. Some people just need to be reminded about what really matters. The next morning, another violation notice appeared, along with an invoice for accumulated fines totaling $1,450. The construction crew did not show up, having been informed by the HOA that continuing the work would result in legal action against their company. That evening, while taking out the trash, I noticed movement across the street. Patricia Winters stood at the curb, her expensive camera aimed directly at our property. When she saw me watching, she made no attempt to hide her actions. Just documenting the continuing violations, she explained with a cold smile when I approached. The board requires thorough records. "You are photographing my son through our windows," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "That crosses a line." "Public street, Mr. Reynolds," she replied. "I have every right to document covenant violations from public property. Perhaps if you had chosen a more appropriate neighborhood for your situation, we could have avoided all this unpleasantness." Days passed. Fines accumulated. Neighbors no longer waved in greeting. The wheelchair ramp sat half-finished, unusable, a daily reminder of bureaucratic cruelty. The temporary metal ramp had been removed during construction, forcing me to carry Alex up and down the steps whenever we needed to leave the house. The humiliation in his eyes each time cut deeper than any HOA fine ever could. The construction foreman called one afternoon, his voice apologetic but firm. "Mr. Reynolds, I am sorry, but we cannot continue your project. Someone from the HOA has been calling the building inspector daily, demanding reviews of our permits. They are threatening to report our company for multiple violations if we return to your site." The half-finished concrete path now resembled an abandoned project, collecting leaves and debris. Each morning, I noticed Patricia watching from her window as Alex, and I struggled with the front steps, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. The first sign of escalation beyond bureaucratic harassment came on a Wednesday morning. I stepped outside to find the lumber for our ramp scattered across the front yard, nails protruding dangerously from displaced boards. The carefully stacked materials had clearly been deliberately tampered with overnight. Nothing was stolen, just maliciously disarranged to create a hazard. I spent an hour carefully restacking the materials, checking for damage. A neighbor walking his dog crossed to the opposite side of the street rather than pass directly by our house. This was what we had become in just a few short weeks, neighborhood pariahs. That afternoon, Alex returned from the community pool in the back of Mrs. Harper's car. Our kind neighbor from next door had been taking him swimming twice a week, one of the few neighborhood kindnesses that remained. But today, Alex's face was streaked with tears as he wheeled up our temporary access ramp. "I do not want to go back to the pool," he announced, his voice cracking. When I pressed him for details, the story emerged in painful fragments. A group of children his age had surrounded him at the pool, telling him his family was ruining the neighborhood and bringing down property values. They had prevented him from joining their games, saying their parents did not want them associating with Rule Bree. "Acres. They said we are going to have to move anyway once the fines get big enough," Alex whispered. "Is that true, Dad?" I called a lawyer that evening, an old friend who specialized in real estate law. His assessment was honest but disheartening. "Technically, the ADA should protect your right to make these modifications," he explained. "But fighting the HOA could take years and cost tens of thousands in legal fees. These organizations have deep pockets and can drag out litigation until most homeowners give up." The following week brought the monthly HOA general meeting. I arrived early, armed with a compromise proposal. New architectural drawings showed decorative elements added to the ramp design, colonial-style railings, planters with flowers, and materials that would match our home's exterior perfectly. The modifications would increase our costs significantly, but might satisfy the aesthetic concerns of the board. Patricia spotted me setting up my presentation materials and immediately approached the board members, speaking in hushed tones while glancing in my direction. When the meeting began, she restructured the agenda, pushing my item to the end after many residents had already left. When finally called upon to present, I had barely displayed the new designs when Patricia interrupted. "The board has already ruled on this matter, Mr. Reynolds. These cosmetic adjustments do not address the fundamental violations. But these modifications directly address the aesthetic concerns raised at the previous meeting, I protested. The decision stands, she replied firmly. Next agenda item. As I gathered my rejected materials, Patricia approached, standing uncomfortably close. You know, Mr. Reynolds, she said, voice lowered so only I could hear, I know people at the county office. How secure do you feel in your position there? Her smile suggested casual conversation, but her eyes glittered with malice. The threat was unmistakable. She was now targeting my livelihood as fire marshal. Are you threatening me, Mrs. Winters? I asked quietly. Merely making conversation, she replied. Small communities like ours function best when everyone understands their place. Previous homeowners who could not adapt eventually found other neighborhoods more accommodating. 2 evenings later, a soft knock at our back door surprised me. An elderly man stood on our patio, constantly glancing over his shoulder to ensure he had not been observed. I recognized him as Mr. Gonzalez from 3 doors down. I cannot stay, he whispered. But you should know you are not the first. Patricia picks someone every year. Last year it was the Richardsons with their autistic son. Before that, the widow who could not maintain her lawn after her husband died. She drove them all out. Why does no one stop her? I asked. Fear, he replied simply. She has connections throughout the city government, or at least she claims to. People believe her. When she targets someone, the neighborhood isolates them completely. He refused to give his name or stay for coffee, too frightened of potential retaliation. Throughout the week, I documented everything. The violation notices, the threatening letters, the photographic surveillance of our home. My position as fire marshal had taught me the importance of meticulous records. If this eventually went to court, I wanted irrefutable evidence of harassment. Friday evening arrived, ending one of the most difficult weeks since moving to Pinecrest Estates. I had taken Alex to physical therapy after school and stopped for groceries on the way home. The trunk of my car was filled with bags as we turned onto our street. The setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of our neighbors. From 2 blocks away, I noticed an unusual orange glow coming from the direction of our house. As we drew closer, my heart froze. Flames leapt from the pile of construction materials in our front yard, dangerously close to the house itself. The fire had clearly been burning for several minutes, consuming the lumber intended for Alex's ramp. I screeched to a halt in front of our home, yelling for Alex to stay in the car as I sprinted toward the blaze. Through the gathering smoke, I could see her standing across the street. Patricia Winters, phone in hand, was recording the fire. Her face showed no alarm, no move to call emergency services, only a cold satisfaction as she watched our accessibility materials burning. In that moment, as flames threatened my home and my son, something hardened inside me. The woman had crossed from bureaucratic harassment into criminal territory, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. Tires screeched as I skidded into the driveway. The grocery bags tumbled forgotten across the concrete as I raced toward the growing flames. Years of firefighter training took over, assess the situation, identify the fuel source, determine spread pattern. The fire had been deliberate. Ately set at the base of the lumber pile, and the flames were now climbing dangerously toward our house siding. Alex had disobeyed my instruction to stay in the car. He had maneuvered his wheelchair to the edge of the driveway, his face pressed against the window in horror as he watched fire consume what should have been his path to independence. I sprinted to my vehicle, retrieving the professional-grade fire extinguisher I always kept in the trunk. a habit from years in the fire service. The distant wail of sirens suggested someone had called emergency services, but they would not arrive in time to prevent damage to our home. Patricia remained across the street, still recording with her phone as I battled the flames. Neighbors began emerging from their houses, some with garden hoses, others merely spectators to the unfolding drama. The distinct smell of gasoline hung heavy in the air. This was no accident. Working methodically, I managed to contain the blaze before it could spread to the house. The lumber for the ramp was destroyed, but the structure of our home remained intact. As the last flames sputtered out under the chemical suppressant, I straightened up, breathing heavily from exertion. Patricia stood apart from the gathering crowd, her expression shifting from satisfaction to alarm as she watched me control the fire with professional efficiency. When our eyes met across the yard, something in my gaze must have unsettled her. She began to back away, lowering her phone. "Stop right there, Mrs. Winters," I called out, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. The crowd parted as I walked toward her, removing my jacket to reveal the county fire marshal shirt I was still wearing from work. As the county fire marshal, I am officially documenting what appears to be deliberate arson on my property, I announced. No one should leave until the police and fire investigation team arrive. The collective gasp from the neighbors was audible. Patricia's face drained of color as she took another step backward. "I have nothing to do with this," she insisted, her voice higher than normal. "I was simply documenting a dangerous situation in our neighborhood." "Is that why you were recording instead of calling 911?" I asked, moving closer. "Is that why I can smell gasoline all over those materials?" Mrs. Rivera from next door stepped forward, arms crossed. "I saw you, Patricia, an hour ago. You were pouring something on those materials from a red container." Other neighbors murmured in agreement. The tide was turning as people found their courage. "That is absurd," Patricia sputtered. "I was simply inspecting." "Save it for the police," I interrupted as two cruisers turned onto our street, responding to multiple emergency calls. "Arson is a felony, so is endangering the life of a child." I gestured toward Alex, still watching from his wheelchair. The police officers approached, taking in the scene with professional detachment. One recognized me immediately. "Marshal Reynolds, what happened here?" I explained the situation while Patricia stood rigidly nearby, her composure crumbling as officers began taking witness statements. Neighbors approached one by one, suddenly eager to share their observations, not just about the fire, but about weeks of harassment and years of Patricia's reign of terror over the community. Mr. Gonzalez, the elderly man who had warned me days earlier, no longer seemed afraid. "She has been terrorizing families in this neighborhood for years," he told a police officer. "Anyone who does not fit her idea of perfect." The fire investigation team arrived minutes later, my colleagues who seemed surprised to find me at the center of an arson case. Their professional courtesy vanished when they realized my son had been endangered. They worked with methodical precision, gathering evidence, taking photographs, and documenting the scene. As the investigation proceeded, I went to check on Alex. He watched the activity with wide eyes. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" he asked quietly. "No, buddy, but Mrs. Winters certainly is," I replied, kneeling beside his wheelchair. "Sometimes people reveal who they truly are through their actions, and sometimes justice catches up with them when they least expect it." The distinct smell of accelerant hung in the evening air as investigators collected samples from the charred lumber. One of my colleagues approached, evidence bag in hand. "Definitely gasoline," he confirmed. "Amateur job poured in an obvious pattern. We have got excellent evidence here, Marshal." Across the street, Patricia was being interviewed by police officers, her gestures becoming increasingly agitated as they asked pointed questions. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling under professional scrutiny. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as the woman who had ruled them through fear for years was reduced to desperate denials. The evidence against Patricia win. Ters mounted with surprising speed. Police discovered a matching gas can in her garage. Security camera footage from 3 nearby houses showed her approaching our construction materials with it, and residue on her hands confirmed contact with accelerants. By midnight, officers led her away in handcuffs, charging her with first-degree arson, reckless endangerment, and violation of accessibility laws. News vans arrived before dawn. The story was irresistible. HOA president arrested for setting fire to child's wheelchair ramp. Local reporters camped at the end of our driveway, hoping for interviews. I kept Alex away from the cameras, protecting him from becoming a spectacle in their hunger for dramatic footage. My colleagues from the Fire Investigation Unit treated the scene with meticulous care. As Fire Marshal, I formally recused myself from the official investigation to avoid any conflict of interest, but my training allowed me to recognize the thoroughness of their work. They documented every detail, collecting samples, taking measurements, and photographing the scene from multiple angles. "We have got her dead to rights, James," my deputy investigator told me quietly. "This was not just malicious, it was dangerous and incompetent. The fire could have easily spread to your home with your son inside." By morning, the story had reached local headlines. My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters seeking comments and neighbors suddenly remembering important details about Patricia's past behavior. The HOA board members scheduled an emergency meeting, publicly expressing shock and claiming no knowledge of Patricia's personal vendetta. "We never authorized any action against your family," insisted the vice president, Howard Grayson, who had attempted to speak in our favor at the previous meeting. "Patricia acted entirely on her own." Documents told a different story. The board had authorized the violation notices, approved the escalating fines, and supported the effort to block our wheelchair ramp construction. Their attempts to distance themselves now seemed hollow and self-serving. The most surprising development came in the afternoon. A knock at our door revealed 5 neighbors standing awkwardly on our porch, carrying tools and building materials. "We want to help rebuild," said Mr. Rodriguez from across the cul-de-sac. "Many of us disagreed with what was happening but were too intimidated to speak up. We would like to make it right." Shame was evident in their eyes, but so was sincerity. Over the next few days, a community volunteer workforce formed. Contractors offered their services for free. A local lumber company donated materials to replace what had been destroyed. Construction resumed on the ramp, this time with neighbors working side by side with professional builders. Mrs. Harper organized a meal train, ensuring we had home-cooked dinners delivered each evening. Mr. Gonzalez brought his grandchildren to play board games with Alex, helping him feel welcome in the neighborhood for the first time. The transformation was remarkable, from isolation to community in the span of a week. The HOA vice president delivered a formal letter rescinding all fines and apologizing for the organization's failure to uphold accessibility rights. "We are completely revising our covenant enforcement procedures," Grayson promised. "Nothing like this will happen again." Patricia remained in custody, denied bail due to the seriousness of the charges and the evidence that she had engaged in a pattern of targeted harassment. Her preliminary hearing revealed additional complaints from former residents who had fled the neighborhood under her reign of intimidation. As the weekend approached, I received a call from the district attorney handling the case. "Marshal Reynolds, we have enough evidence to pursue maximum charges," she explained. "Given your position and the clear documentation, this case is exceptionally strong. Patricia Winters is facing substantial prison time." The wheelchair ramp took shape more beautifully than in our original plans. The community effort added thoughtful touches: solar-powered lights embedded in the railings, a gentle slope perfect for Alex's needs, and landscaping that integrated the structure seamlessly with our home. What had been vilified as an eyesore was becoming a centerpiece of thoughtful, accessible design. The county courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Patricia Winters accepted a plea deal 3 months later, guilty on all charges. Her designer suit had been replaced by standard-issue attire, her imperious demeanor diminished by the reality of her situation. She faced significant jail time and restitution payments, her previous social standing offering no protection against the weight of evidence. My testimony as both victim and fire marshal proved devastating to her defense. Her attorney had attempted to portray the incident as a misunderstanding or accident, but the scientific evidence I presented left no room for doubt. The fire had been deliberately set with clear intent to destroy property and intimidate our family. The true victory, however, came 3 weeks after her sentencing. Neighbors gathered in our front yard for a ribbon-cutting ceremony at our completed wheelchair ramp. Alex beamed as he navigated the gentle slope independently for the first time, the crowd erupting in spontaneous applause as he reached the bottom without assistance. "This is amazing, Dad," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "It is so smooth." The new HOA board, elected after Patricia's removal, stood among the well-wishers. Howard Grayson now served as president, with Mrs. Rivera as vice president. Their first official act had been to adopt comprehensive accessibility guidelines that I helped draft. "We want to be a model for inclusive community standards," Grayson announced during the small ceremony. "What happened here revealed serious flaws in our governance. Today represents a new beginning." Most surprising was the return of families who had left Pinecrest Estates under duress during Patricia's reign. The Richardsons moved back into their former home, their autistic son reunited with friends from school. Mrs. Abernathy, the widow who had been hounded out for lawn violations after her husband's death, attended the ribbon cutting with flowers for Alex. "I never thought I would set foot in this neighborhood again," she confided. "But when I read about what happened and how everyone came together afterward, I knew things had truly changed." The local newspaper ran a feature on our story, prompting HOAs across the county to review their accessibility compliance. Several organizations reached out asking me to speak about balancing community standards with inclusive practices. What had begun as a personal nightmare was transforming into an opportunity for systemic change. As summer faded into autumn, Alex raced up and down the ramp with newfound independence, greeting neighborhood friends who now regularly visited. Children who had once repeated their parents' criticisms now played wheelchair basketball in our driveway, with Alex teaching them the rules. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across our front yard, I stood watching Alex navigate the ramp with practiced ease. Mr. Gonzalez joined me, leaning on his cane. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes it takes a fire to illuminate the darkness, to reveal what needs changing." His words captured the transformation perfectly. The experience had reshaped not just our accessibility, but our understanding of justice and community responsibility. The wheelchair ramp stood as both practical solution and monument to a neighborhood that had found its moral compass when faced with the choice between conformity and compassion. What began with flames of destruction had forged something new, a community strengthened through crisis, more inclusive and humane than before. Patricia's attempt to destroy our place in the neighborhood had instead cemented it, creating bonds of mutual support that extended far beyond our family. "Dad, come on," Alex called, gesturing for me to join the impromptu basketball game forming in our driveway. Neighbors gathered, children laughed, and the ramp that had caused so much conflict now served as the gateway to genuine community.